my name is Running Wolf. My ancestors called me Tali, a name I carry with pride, as I do the blood that flows in my veins, the blood of a people whose feet were the first to touch these ancient lands. The Appalachian Mountains, majestic and silent, have always been our home, our undeniable sanctuary. Their slopes, cloaked in dense forests, hold the stories of generations. Their peaks touch the heavens, where the great spirits dwell. The air here is pure, the water in the streams crystal clear, and every stone once breathed with the wisdom of ages. But in recent lunar cycles, that breath has grown shallow, troubled. The mountain spirits, ever our protectors and guides, have fallen silent, and their silence is heavier than any portent. The first troubling signs appeared at the borders of our ancestral lands, where the territory of my people met the farmlands of the pale-faced settlers. First, livestock began to vanish. Not one or two stray cows, but dozens, disappearing without a trace. The farmers blamed wolves, then bears, but seasoned hunters from both our tribe and among the settlers shook their heads. No known predator left such a void, such an absence of even the smallest remains. Then it was the dogs. They vanished from yards, from latched barns. Even the fiercest watchdogs, whose barks usually drove off nighttime intruders, fell silent forever, gone without a trace. The silence that settled over the outskirts was unnatural, ominous. In our village, nestled cozily at the foot of the Smoky Mountains, whose peaks often vanished into a bluish haze, the elders grew seriously alarmed. Their wrinkled faces became even graver, their gazes turning inward, toward the depths of time. They began to recall the ancient legends, passed down from mouth to mouth around the night fire. Stories of Tzul'kalu, the slant-eyed giant, a monstrous being said to dwell in the deepest mountain gorges, and of the Squenon, evil spirits that took the form of terrible beasts and hunted under the cover of darkness. These legends had long been covered in the dust of ages, turned into cautionary tales for disobedient children. The youth, their minds more occupied with stories found on the flickering screens of smartphones and computers than with ancient lore, initially just chuckled. But their laughter was strained, nervous, and despite their bravado, anxiety could be read in their eyes. The rumors were becoming too persistent, the wave of inexplicable fear rolling down from the mountains too palpable. As a direct descendant of hunters and trackers, whose skills had been honed over generations, I could not stand aside. My instincts, inherited from my ancestors, told me that something more than the work of an unknown predator lay behind the disappearances of livestock and dogs. I decided to venture into the forest myself and investigate the disturbing rumors. Choosing the direction from which reports of disappearances came most frequently, I delved deep into the thicket, where human feet rarely tread, where ancient trees formed a dense, shadowy canopy. For several days I followed barely visible trails, listening to every rustle, scrutinizing every track, and I found them. Tracks. They were enormous, belonging to no beast I knew. 5 toes clearly imprinted on the damp earth resembled a human foot, but each toe ended in a deep claw mark, the claw itself, judging by the size, longer than my hunting knife. The distance between the prints spoke of the creature's incredible stride, and the smell. It hit my nostrils suddenly, making me freeze. It was a vile concoction of wet dog, rotting flesh, and something else. Ancient, primeval, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Nearby, under a wild raspberry bush, I discovered a mauled deer. What I saw defied any notion of an ordinary predator's hunt. The animal had been killed with such ferocious rage, such excessive brutality, that it was not the work of a wolf, a bear, or even a cougar. Its bones were snapped like dry twigs, its flesh torn out in huge chunks. With a heavy heart, and even heavier thoughts, I returned to the village and immediately reported my findings to the Council of Elders. Gray heads bent over the sketches of the tracks I brought, and my detailed description of what I had seen. Wrinkled faces, etched with the map of lived years, expressed deep concern. Eyes that had seen more winters than I had lived years on this earth looked at me with worry and understanding. They listened to me in silence, without interruption, their faces growing more serious with every word. When I finished, a long silence fell upon the community house. Then the elders spoke. They talked of ancient rituals of protection our ancestors had used to guard the village from evil forces. They recalled special methods of hunting creatures like the one whose tracks I had found. It was the very monster they had been thinking of. It became clear that merely increasing vigilance would not suffice. We needed to prepare for an encounter with an unknown and very dangerous enemy. Our tribe's shaman, Gray Feather, whose wisdom and connection to the spirit world were undeniable, immediately began to prepare the warriors. Cleansing ceremonies with the smoke of sacred herbs, sage and cedar, were held daily. The smoke, rising to the sky, carried away fears and doubts, filling the warriors' hearts with determination. Prayers to the Great Spirit and the guardian spirits of our mountains sounded day and night, asking for their protection and strength. Amulets, crafted from bear claws, symbolizing power and eagle feathers, bestowing keen sight and courage, were charged with ancestral power during special ceremonies and distributed to those who would stand watch and defend the tribe. We, the young hunters, filled with the resolve to protect our people, divided into small groups. We armed ourselves not only with our familiar hunting rifles, but also with other available weapons. On Gray Feather's advice, some bullets were cast from a special alloy with silver added, a metal that, according to legend, possessed the power to wound creatures of darkness. We moved through the forest silently, like shadows, using our intimate knowledge of every trail, every tree, every hiding place, passed down through generations. Night after night, we went out on patrol, listening intently to the sounds of the forest. But the forest answered us only with an unsettling, oppressive silence that was more terrifying than any scream. The whisper of ancient fear, previously barely discernible, grew louder, transforming into a distinct roar of impending doom. One of ours, a young and brave lad named Flying Squirrel, went missing. He had gone alone to check snares set by a distant stream and never returned. Search parties combed the forest, but he was never found. Only shreds of his hunting shirt, snagged on thorny bushes, and signs of a monstrous, desperate struggle on the damp earth testified to his tragic fate. Fear, cold and clammy, began to seep into the hearts of even the bravest warriors. The ancient evil had not just awakened. It had already begun to reap its bloody harvest. Far from our mountains, shrouded in ancient mysteries and unsettling premonitions, in an entirely different world built of stone, glass, and steel, its own events were unfolding. In the labyrinthine government buildings of Washington, D.C., men in stern business suits, with inscrutable faces, bent over vast maps and flickering monitor screens. Our land, sacred to my people, the heart of our history and spirituality, was to them just one of many sectors marked on an operational map, a zone of instability. Reports of unexplained disappearances of people and livestock in the Appalachian region, which had begun to arrive with increasing frequency, initially caused little concern, lost in the general flow of information. However, over time, these reports began to form an alarming mosaic. Discrepancies in local sheriff's reports, who could offer no clear explanation for what was happening. Strange, anomalous heat signatures detected by satellites on detailed images of forested areas. All these disparate fragments of information flowed to one highly classified location, to one specialized department. Deep within the Pentagon, in one of those units whose existence is not typically reported in newspapers or mentioned in official reports, analysts at the Department of Cryptozoological Threats, or DCU for short, methodically put two and two together. These were people of a particular mindset, accustomed to working with information that transcended ordinary understanding, with data that most considered fiction or mass hysteria. Major Evelyn Reed, the department's lead cryptobiologist, a woman with a sharp, penetrating gaze and an analytical mind, who had dedicated her life to studying phenomena that official science preferred to ignore, carefully studied the incoming reports. In this data, she began to detect a certain pattern, ominously reminiscent of incidents she had found in deeply classified archives from past years. Incidents that had never received a rational explanation. Her desk was piled with printouts of satellite images, graphs of anomalous activity, and witness testimonies, carefully filtered of obvious exaggerations and fabrications. The alarm, amplified by Major Reed's conclusions, quickly reached the ears of Colonel Riggs, a man whose moniker, Bulldog, perfectly reflected his character and methods. Colonel Riggs commanded an elite special operations unit, officially designated A-213, but known in very small circles by the informal name Reapers. Later, this unit operated under the designation Delta. They had earned this nickname for their ruthless efficiency in numerous covert operations conducted in the world's hottest spots, where problems needed to be solved quickly, quietly, and definitively. Riggs was a man as if hewn from granite, a taciturn pragmatist to the core, not inclined to believe in fairy tales and superstitions. However, he had boundless trust in verified facts, instrument readings, and, most importantly, his people, professionals of the highest caliber. His face, with its hard features and watchful, cold eyes, expressed no emotion as he listened to the report on the situation in the Appalachians. Wasting no time, Colonel Riggs requested all available data. Reports from FBI agents on missing persons landed on his desk, along with information from the U.S. Geological Survey. Specialists were looking for a connection between the creature's activity and recorded micro-earthquakes or other geophysical anomalies. Cybersecurity experts analyzed rumors and fragmented messages circulating in the darkest corners of the Internet, the so-called Darknet, where they found scraps of information unavailable to official sources. His analysts, working around the clock, meticulously sifted out blatant nonsense, urban legends, and deliberate disinformation. But even after such a rigorous filtering, grains of frightening, inexplicable truth remained, pointing to the presence of something very dangerous and utterly unknown in the Appalachian Mountains. Colonel Riggs was well aware of the complexity of the upcoming operation. The territory of the Native American reservation, where, according to preliminary data, the epicenter of the activity was located, possessed a special status legally akin to sovereign territory. Any uncoordinated incursion of armed forces onto this land would provoke a serious internal conflict, or even an international scandal with unpredictable consequences. Therefore, the first phase of the operation had to be as covert as possible: observation only, information gathering, threat confirmation. Stealth unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, equipped with the most advanced surveillance systems operating in infrared and to penetrate dense foliage, radar bands were launched. This allowed for clear thermal imaging even in difficult conditions. Undercover agents were sent into the area, some posing as ecologists studying rare moss species, others as geologists prospecting for minerals. Their task was to gather maximum information on site without attracting attention. The soldiers of the Delta Unit were the best of the best, the elite of the armed forces. Their training and equipment met the highest standards and were designed for unconventional warfare, a war against an enemy about whom practically nothing was known. Their arsenal included the latest assault rifles capable of using special ammunition, including experimental rounds with cores made of a special silver-based alloy, developed precisely for such cases. Each soldier was equipped with latest generation thermal imagers capable of detecting the slightest temperature changes, and night vision devices that turned pitch darkness into clear day. Silent, short-range reconnaissance drones infiltrated the most inaccessible places, transmitting images in real time. Additionally, they had electronic warfare equipment at their disposal to jam enemy communication channels, detect their electronic devices, and disrupt the creature's coordination. The initial primary objective set for Delta was clear and unambiguous: confirm the existence of a real threat, assess its true scale, and capture at least one specimen, dead or alive, for study. Neutralizing the enemy was considered only as a last resort. After all other options had been exhausted, and was to be carried out with minimal publicity, leaving no traces that could lead to an information leak. Colonel Riggs understood that his men were about to face something beyond their usual combat experience. But he also knew that Delta was ready for any challenge. Our small hunting party, led by me, Tali, moved cautiously through the forest, following the faint signs left by the missing flying squirrel. Every broken twig, every crushed blade of grass told us of his path. The tracks, at first confident, then increasingly erratic, led us to an old, willow-choked stream known in our tribe as Wolf Creek. This place had long had a bad reputation. The elders always advised to avoid it, especially at dusk. The air here was heavy, still, saturated with the smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, elusive, causing a dull anxiety. The silence pressed on our ears, broken only by the quiet gurgle of water in the stream and our own ragged breathing. We felt we were being watched, though we saw no one. It burst from the dense hazel thicket utterly suddenly, without a single sound to warn of its approach. The creature was enormous, significantly taller than the tallest man in our tribe, its massive body covered in coarse matted fur of a grayish-brown, dirty earth color. Its muzzle was elongated, predatory, vaguely wolf-like, but far larger and more terrifying. Long, sharp fangs protruded from its snarling maw, and its eyes burned with a frenzied, crimson-red fire, devoid of any hint of humanity or even animalism. It was the gaze of pure primal terror. The creature moved on two powerful hind legs, maintaining an animalistic agility, but when necessary, it switched to all fours with astonishing ease, becoming even more swift and dangerous. This was not the Tsul Kalu of our ancient legends, not an incorporeal squinon. What stood before us was something far more real, more tangible, and therefore unspeakably horrifying. Its appearance evoked not just fear, but a paralyzing stupor that bound will and body. Instinct, honed by years of hunting and survival in the wild, overcame the initial shock. We simultaneously raised our rifles and opened fire. The roar of gunshots shattered the oppressive silence of the forest. Bullets, ordinary lead bullets, struck the creature's massive body, leaving dark spots of blood on its hide, but caused no serious harm, only enraging it further. The creature roared, a low, guttural sound that made the earth tremble beneath our feet, and lunged at us. It moved with incredible, almost unbelievable speed for its size, closing the distance in mere moments. My friend, Swift Spear, standing slightly to my left, didn't even have time to cry out. The monster knocked him down with a single blow from its powerful paw, and in the next instant, its fangs clamped onto my comrade's throat. The crunch of breaking bones and a sickening gurgle ended his life. Horror and rage overwhelmed me. I reloaded my rifle, chambering a round loaded with a bullet of that very silver alloy Greyfeather had prepared. Aiming for the creature's leg to slow it down, I squeezed the trigger. The silver bullet bit deep, and the monster's reaction was instantaneous and completely different from the previous hits. It emitted a piercing, blood-curdling howl, a sound filled with such inhuman pain and fury that the blood in the veins of all who heard it ran cold. The howl echoed through the forest, silencing even the birds. The creature, stumbling and limping on its wounded leg, retreated, disappearing into the dense thicket as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving us alone with our grief, terror, and the body of our fallen friend. I was wounded. Deep, ragged gashes from the creature's claws ran red on my left arm, from shoulder to elbow, causing a searing pain. But I had survived to tell the tale, to warn the others. We, the survivors, struggled to lift Swift Spear's lifeless body. Our hearts were as heavy as stones from the ancient gorges. Now no one in the tribe had a shred of doubt. The ancient evil had not just awakened, it was here, among us, and it craved blood. The laughter of the youth died away completely, replaced by grim determination. At that very moment, as we mourned our loss and tried to comprehend the full horror of what had happened, high above the treetops, unseen and unheard from the ground, a Delta UAV, controlled by an operator hundreds of miles away in a sterile command center, dispassionately recorded the thermal signatures of the unfolding tragedy. The operator, a sergeant codenamed Hawkeye, an experienced specialist who had seen much in his time, stared intently at the monitor. He saw blurred heat spots corresponding to human figures, bursts of energy from gunshots, and then another figure appeared on the screen, much larger than the others, radiating an incredibly intense heat, unlike any human or known animal. Its movements were too fast, too chaotic. Sergeant Hawkeye, unable to restrain himself, swore under his breath. What he was seeing didn't fit any instructions or protocols. Colonel Riggs received the report and video footage from the drone minutes later. The image quality, obtained from a high altitude through dense foliage, was far from perfect, but it was more than enough to understand what was happening. Blurred outlines, anomalous thermal readings, the incredible speed of one of the objects. All this confirmed the worst assumptions. There was no doubt. These were not rogue bears or a pack of feral wolves. This was something else, something his men were created to fight. Not a muscle twitched on the colonel's face, but a cold glint of determination appeared in his eyes. He immediately gave an order. Considering reports of the creature's strange reaction to the silver bullet, mentioned in Tali's report, this information had been relayed through the Bureau of Indian Affairs after initial contact, to accelerate the production and delivery of experimental ammunition with increased silver content, previously developed by the DCU for encounters with unknown biological threats. The alloy formula, suggested by Shaman Greyfeather and relayed by Tali, was rapidly analyzed and served as the basis for modifying existing designs, which were now urgently put into production on special lines. Meanwhile, at the DCU in Washington, Major Evelyn Reed received the same drone data. She watched the recordings several times, her face growing paler with each viewing. Her worst fears, based on analysis of archival materials and scattered reports, were being confirmed in the most horrifying way. She immediately contacted her superiors, reporting irrefutable evidence of an unknown biological threat. After a short, high-level meeting, the only possible decision in this situation was made. They needed to establish contact immediately with the local inhabitants, the Native American tribe on whose territory these events were unfolding. They understood. Without knowledge of the mountains, without understanding the terrain and the nature of this threat from the tribe's perspective, Delta's operation was doomed to failure and a senseless slaughter for the elite soldiers. The time for covert observation was over. Several days passed, filled with anxious waiting and preparation for the worst. Then one morning, several khaki-colored army SUVs drove up to the border of our ancestral lands, where the reservation territory began. The dust kicked up by their tires slowly settled on the roadside grass. Men in military uniform, but without any insignia, emerged from the vehicles, which immediately alarmed our lookouts. Their faces were serious and focused. This group was led by a man from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, an official we had known for several years. The tribe's relationship with him was complicated. We didn't trust him much, like most representatives of federal authorities, whose promises often diverged from their actions. The official, visibly nervous, approached our sentries and formally requested a meeting with the tribe's council of elders. He stated that the men with him had an important and urgent matter concerning the security of the entire region. The council of elders gathered in our community house, a large log structure that served as the venue for all important meetings and ceremonies. The air inside was thick with the smell of hearth smoke and dried herbs. Colonel Riggs and his closest aide, Captain Shepard, entered the building unarmed, having left their weapons in the vehicles. This was a deliberate gesture, a demonstration of respect for our traditions and sovereignty, which did not go unnoticed by the elders. Riggs, a tall, powerfully built man with a determined face, spoke directly, without the usual political platitudes and empty phrases. His voice was low and confident. "We have a common enemy," he began, his gaze sweeping over those assembled. "We know what's happening in these mountains. We haven't come to seize your land or interfere in your affairs. We've come to help you destroy what threatens you and us, and everyone who lives in these parts." The elders listened to him attentively, their faces inscrutable. Chief Soaring Eagle, the most respected and wisest among them, was the first to break the silence. His voice, though quiet, was full of dignity and hidden strength. "Your ancestors came to our land many times with promises," he said, looking Colonel Riggs straight in the eye, "and many times they broke their word. They took our lands, destroyed our people, our traditions. Why should we believe you now? How are your words different from those who came before you?" Then I, Tali, spoke. The pain of Swift Spear's recent loss was still too raw, and my tightly bandaged left arm under my shirt still throbbed from the deep scratches, a reminder of the encounter with the monster. I told them about our encounter with the beast, its incredible strength and fury, how my friend had died. My words were filled with grief and anger. Some of the young warriors present at the council made no secret of their distrust and hostility towards the newcomers. They demanded the outsiders be driven away immediately, claiming we could handle our own problems, just as our ancestors had for centuries. Tension hung in the air, sharp as a knife's edge. The arguments were long and heated. The voices of those who remembered old grievances and urged caution mingled with the voices of those who recognized the scale of the new threat and understood we couldn't handle it alone. In the end, wisdom and pragmatism prevailed. We agreed to cooperate with Colonel Riggs's men, but we put forward our own non-negotiable conditions. First and foremost, complete and unconditional respect for our traditions, our beliefs, and our sacred sites. No soldier was to set foot on land considered sacred by us without our permission and escort. Second, our right to a voice in planning any operations conducted on our land. We were to participate in decision-making as equal partners, not as blind executors of someone else's will. And third, our warriors would participate in joint actions not as porters or guides, but as full-fledged combat units, as equal warriors. To my somewhat surprise, Colonel Riggs listened to our conditions very attentively and immediately, without any hesitation, agreed to them. He was smart enough to understand. Without our thorough knowledge of these mountains, without our experience of surviving in them, his super soldiers would be blind and helpless against an unknown enemy. Thus began the first, still very cautious, steps towards cooperation. We shared with the outsiders what little knowledge we had about the creature's habits as described in our ancient legends, about secret paths and gorges these beings used for movement, about sacred herbs whose smoke, according to our ancestors' tales, had the power to ward off evil and purify spaces. Colonel Riggs, in turn, demonstrated some of his high-tech equipment. We examined with unconcealed interest the thermal imagers, which, as he explained, could see the heat of a human or animal body even through dense foliage and in complete darkness. We were shown compact radios that provided reliable communication over long distances where ordinary cell phones had no signal. It was an exchange of knowledge between two completely different worlds. The Delta Force soldiers set up their temporary field camp on the very edge of our lands, a few miles from our village. The location was tactically well chosen, with good visibility, and the possibility of a quick retreat. We, in turn, assigned a group of our most experienced hunters and trackers to work jointly with the soldiers. They were named the Wolf Brothers, in honor of the wolf, our totem animal, a symbol of strength, endurance, and unity. The tension between the two groups still hung in the air, physically palpable. Their strict military discipline and advanced technology stood in contrast to our natural instincts, intuition, and deep knowledge of the surrounding environment. It was an alliance born of necessity, not mutual affection. Soon, another important figure arrived at the Delta camp, Major Evelyn Reed from the DCU. She was not a warrior in the conventional sense. Her weapons were not a rifle and a knife, but a sharp analytical mind and extensive knowledge in cryptozoology, the science studying creatures whose existence is not recognized by official science. Major Reed listened with immense, genuine interest to our legends and tales, which the elders recounted to her. She spent hours talking with Gray Feather, our shaman, meticulously writing down his every word in her notebook. She scrupulously examined the tracks we found, photographed them, took soil samples. She studied the remains of animals mauled by unknown predators, trying to gather as much information as possible about our mysterious and deadly enemy. Her presence brought an element of scientific approach to our joint work, and we hoped it would help us better understand the nature of the threat. The first joint excursions deep into the forests became a true test of endurance not only for each of us, but also for our newly formed fragile alliance. Differences in approaches to accomplishing tasks were evident from the start. The Delta Force soldiers moved in well-coordinated tactical groups of 4 to 6 men, constantly monitoring sectors of fire, relying on their firepower, body armor, and complex electronic devices. Their movements were honed to automatism, every action calculated. We, the warriors of my tribe, operated differently. We glided through the forest like silent shadows, singly or in pairs, our feet barely touching the ground. We read signs that remained an invisible book to the soldiers. A barely noticeably broken branch 7 feet above the ground, a particular way grass was matted indicating the direction of a large animal's movement, a faint scent lingering in the air and changing with the wind's direction. To them, these were mere landscape elements. To us, vital information. During one such reconnaissance mission, our mixed group, consisting of 2 Delta soldiers and 3 of our warriors, including myself, Tali, my left arm, tightly bandaged with medicinal herbs from Gray Feather, still ached dully, but I tried to ignore it. Unexpectedly stumbled upon a pack of 5 creatures. They were smaller than the monster we had encountered at Wolf Creek, but no less dangerous. They moved exclusively on all 4s, with incredible speed and animalistic ferocity. Their bodies were lean, muscular, covered in short, coarse fur. We later learned that Riggs's soldiers had nicknamed these creatures scalpers for their horrifying habit of taking scalps from their victims, much like some warriors did in olden times. A short but incredibly fierce skirmish erupted. The scalpers attacked without warning, ambushing us. One of our young warriors, Silent Stone, was gravely wounded, deep, ragged gashes on his chest and leg. He fell, bleeding profusely. A Delta soldier, a medic codenamed Doc, immediately rushed to him, ignoring the ongoing fight. Using his army medical supplies and field surgery skills, he managed to stop the bleeding and stabilize Silent Stone's condition, effectively saving his life. This act did not go unnoticed by our warriors. Silent Stone was later evacuated to the base camp where he recovered, but he took no further part in active combat. Major Evelyn Reed, with her characteristic scrupulousness and methodical approach, meticulously studied all the evidence we managed to gather. Fur samples found at the skirmish site, saliva particles left on the clothes of the wounded, bullets extracted from the bodies of 2 scalpers we managed to destroy in that fight, all underwent thorough analysis. She confirmed our suspicions and Greyfeather's observations, as well as preliminary data from military developments, accelerated after receiving information from our tribe. Bullets with cores of a special silver alloy did indeed inflict much more serious and painful wounds on these creatures, causing severe toxic shock and slowing tissue regeneration. Major Reed also conducted experiments with portable ultrasonic emitters of varying power and frequency. She hypothesized that these creatures were particularly vulnerable to certain sound frequencies, causing them severe discomfort, disorientation, or even pain. The search for this Achilles' heel continued. It gradually became clear that we were dealing not with one species of unknown predator, but with at least 2 distinct, albeit related, forms. The scalpers, or dogmen as the soldiers called them, were predominantly quadrupedal, beast-like creatures that operated in large packs, similar to wolves or hyenas. They were fast, ferocious, and possessed incredible resilience. But there were others. Those that almost always walked on 2 legs were significantly larger, more massive, and most disturbingly, far more intelligent and cunning. If necessary, they could move quickly on all 4s, but their primary mode of movement and attack was humanoid. They commanded the Dogman packs directing their attacks. We, in our tribe, called them in our language, Adalesgi Udohyada, which can be translated as those who turn or the turning ones. Colonel Riggs's soldiers called them more simply and concisely werewolves. It was one of these werewolves that killed Swift Spear and wounded me. While Major Reed searched for scientific explanations and ways to combat the creatures, Greyfeather, our shaman, waged his own spiritual war. He unfailingly performed cleansing and protective rituals before every foray our warriors made into the forest. He insisted that all our warriors constantly carry consecrated amulets and use the smoke of sacred tobacco and sage to ward off evil spirits and protect against dark forces. The Delta soldiers initially viewed these rituals with poorly concealed smirks, considering them relics of the past and empty superstitions. However, after several inexplicable incidents when creature patrols clearly avoided areas of the forest where our warriors had conducted sage smudging, or when those wounded after contact with the creatures recovered more quickly after Greyfeather's rituals, their skepticism noticeably diminished. Some of the soldiers even began to observe our customs with curiosity. The creatures, sensing our growing unity and readiness to resist, began to wage psychological warfare against us. Every night around our camps, both the Delta camp and our village, their blood-curdling, drawn-out howls echoed. These sounds were filled with threat, hatred, and primal fury. They were clearly probing our defenses, trying to identify weak spots, to lure individuals away from the protection of fires and comrades. Sleep became a true luxury. The constant tension frayed the nerves of both Riggs's men and our warriors. Despite all cultural differences, the language barrier, and the mutual distrust that had not yet completely vanished, the shared mortal danger gradually began to bring us closer. We increasingly saved each other's lives, without thinking about who stood beside us, one of our own or an outsider. I myself pulled Sergeant Miller, one of the Delta soldiers, from under a small rock slide caused by the creature's machinations when a boulder pinned him. A few days later, he covered me with a barrage of fire from his rifle when an enraged Dogman ambushed me, giving me precious seconds to dodge and strike back. Colonel Riggs, a pragmatist to the core, increasingly began to listen to my advice and the opinions of our trackers regarding the terrain, mountain movement tactics, and the unknown enemy's behavior. Using a unique combination of our ancient knowledge of secret trails, hidden gorges, and wild animal behavior, passed down through generations, and the military's high-tech capabilities, such as satellite images overlaid with thermal maps of the area, we began the painstaking work of locating the creature's lair. All discovered tracks, all reports of attacks, all anomalous thermal signatures inexorably led in one direction, deep into the mountain range, to the area of old, long-abandoned coal mines known among our people by the ominous name Black Fang. This place had always had an evil reputation. Our elders said the land there had been desecrated many generations ago and advised to avoid it. Even the most desperate hunters tried not to venture into those parts without extreme necessity. The tribal elders, keepers of our history and wisdom, shared with us and Colonel Riggs's men the ancient legends associated with the Black Fang mines. They told us that these mines had been dug by the palefaces back in the last century on the site of an ancient burial ground of our people, thereby disturbing the peace of our ancestors and awakening powerful earth spirits. The legends said that deep within these mines dwelled some ancient primal evil that occasionally awakened, emerging to the surface and bringing death and destruction. Major Evelyn Reed listened to these stories with rapt attention, eagerly absorbing every detail, every scrap of information. She constantly made notes in her field journal, trying to correlate mythological images and legends with the scientific data she already possessed, searching for a rational kernel within them. To confirm our assumptions and obtain more accurate information about the situation inside the mines, a risky reconnaissance operation was undertaken. Delta launched several miniature drones, equipped with video cameras and sensitive sensors, into the dilapidated ventilation shafts and adits of Black Fang. The cameras transmitted eerie, fragmented footage to the monitors in the command post. Vast, dark underground chambers littered with rock debris and bones, both animal and, what was particularly terrifying, human. In the faint light filtering through rare breaches in the ceilings, or in the beams of the drone's own illuminators, swift, indistinct shadows flickered, moving with incredible speed. Simultaneously, our best trackers, including myself, Tali, under the cover of night, and with all precautions, approached several known entrances to the mines. We spent several hours there, observing and listening. Our observations fully confirmed the drone data. Creature activity in the mine area was extremely high, especially at night. Muffled roars, howls, and scraping sounds emanated from the depths. During one such foray to the main, best-preserved entrance to the mine complex, we discovered something that made our blood run cold. These were the tracks of an enormous creature, a werewolf, but much larger and more massive than those we had previously encountered, and those whose tracks we had seen before. Its paw prints left in the damp clay soil were incredibly deep, and the claw marks resembled furrows left by sickles. The entire area around this entrance was heavily marked by it. A sharp, suffocating odor, a mixture of musk, blood, and the acrid smell of primal predatory nature, was unbearable and nauseating. There was no doubt this was their leader, the alpha predator, the strongest and most dangerous creature in the pack. He controlled all the others. Major Reed, after carefully analyzing all the collected data, reconnaissance reports, drone video footage, our observations, tribal legends, and the results of her own research, came to some important conclusions regarding the nature and tactics of our enemy. The Dogmen, or scalpers in her opinion, represented the strike force. They were incredibly fast, ferocious in attack, possessed immense physical strength, and operated in large, well-coordinated packs. However, their intelligence was not very high. They relied mainly on instincts and brute force. The werewolves, the Adalesgi Udayada, were entirely different. They were larger, stronger, and, most importantly, far more cunning and intelligent than the Dogmen. They were the commanders, the strategists, controlling the pack's actions. Major Reed even hypothesized that the werewolves possessed a primitive form of telepathy, or some other means of non-verbal communication, allowing them to control and direct the Dogmen from a distance. Their lair in the abandoned Black Fang mines was their main fortress, inaccessible and well protected. But on the other hand, it also became a trap for them if a well-planned and executed assault operation was carried out. Colonel Riggs, our military leader, Grey Lynx, myself, Tally, and several top Delta operators, including Captain Iceman, commander of the assault team, bent over detailed maps of the area and schematics of the mine complex, which had been compiled from drone data and our knowledge. The development of the assault plan began. The plan was daring, risky, but the only one possible. It consisted of two main parts. First part, our warriors, using their superior knowledge of the terrain and traditional hunting methods, were to lure as many Dogmen as possible out of the mines to the surface and into a pre-prepared trap in one of the narrow gorges. Second part, the Delta unit, reinforced by several of our most experienced and battle-hardened warriors, was to penetrate deep into the mine complex under the cover of this diversion through one of the less used adits and eliminate the Alpha, as well as any remaining werewolves. It was a strategy that united two different minds, two different approaches to warfare. 3 days after the reconnaissance and development of the assault plan, filled with feverish, tense preparation, the final night arrived. Everyone understood that not only our own lives, but the fate of the entire region depended on the success of this operation. Delta soldiers meticulously prepared their special equipment, checking weapons, stocking up on ammunition with silver cores, preparing flashbang grenades to disorient the enemy in confined spaces, and small-shaped charges to breach blockages and fortifications in the tunnels. We, the warriors of the tribe in turn, prepared our traps, deep wolf pits with sharpened stakes at the bottom, camouflaged snares of strong steel cables that could break the legs of even the largest beast. Our blacksmiths, at Colonel Riggs's request, forged several dozen arrowheads and spearheads from pure silver, and Grey Feather performed a special consecration ritual over them. each of us, soldier and tribal warrior alike, fully realized. The upcoming battle would be to the death, and everyone was ready to pay any price for victory. When the moon hid behind a thick veil of clouds, and the mountains plunged into impenetrable darkness, Greyfeather, our old and wise shaman, conducted a great ritual of purification and blessing for the warriors. The thick aromatic smoke of sacred herbs, sage, cedar, and sweetgrass enveloped our temporary camp, located a few miles from the cursed Black Fang mines. This smoke, rising from the ritual fire, intertwined with the low guttural prayers Greyfeather offered to the Great Spirit, the spirits of our ancestors, and the mighty guardian spirits of these mountains, asking them for strength, courage, and protection for those preparing to go into battle. Every Cherokee warrior, from the youngest to the most experienced, approached the shaman in turn and received his personal blessing. Greyfeather painted ancient war patterns on our faces and chests, symbolizing the fury of the wolf, the keen sight of the eagle, and the steadfastness of the bear. Patterns our ancestors wore going into their final battles. After the ritual, we dispersed to our places, immersed in silent concentration. We sharpened the blades of our knives to razor edge, checked the tension of our bowstrings, meticulously cleaned the barrels of our hunting rifles, preparing them for deadly work. The atmosphere was imbued with solemn resolve. At the same time, in the Delta camp, Colonel Riggs gathered his men for a final briefing. His speech was short, militarily precise, and devoid of any sentimentality. "This is not a drill, men." His low, rumbling voice sounded clearly in the night silence. "The enemy we are about to face is real. He is strong, he is cunning, and he knows no mercy. Remember everything you've been taught. Watch each other's backs. Work as a single unit. And most importantly, come back alive. Every last one of you." After this, Major Evelyn Reed, who was also to participate in the operation as part of Riggs's group, distributed individual ultrasonic repellers to each member of the assault team. These were small devices she had developed based on her latest research. They were tuned to a specific frequency that, according to her calculations, caused severe discomfort and pain to the creatures without harming humans. It was another small hope in the impending struggle. A few hours before the operation began, I, Tali, Colonel Riggs, our war chief Grey Lynx, and the commander of Delta's assault team, Captain Iceman, a tall, fair-haired officer with ice-blue eyes, once again went over the entire plan for the upcoming battle in detail. We bent over a large map of the area, on which were marked the mine tunnel schematics, both those we knew and those discovered by the drones. Each group, each soldier and warrior, clearly knew their task, their place in the battle order, primary and alternate retreat routes, and the system of signals. We decided to use a mixed communication system. Our traditional signals, such as mimicking the calls of night birds or specific smoke signals, to coordinate actions of groups on the surface, and encrypted radio communication for the soldiers to communicate inside the mines and between main units. Every detail was considered, every possible scenario was examined. The armaments of our two worlds, preparing for a joint battle, differed strikingly, yet complemented each other. Delta soldiers wore heavy body armor, protective helmets with integrated communication and night vision systems, and an impressive arsenal of automatic weapons, grenades, and special equipment capable of stopping a small army. We, the warriors of the tribe, were much lighter and more mobile. Our traditional weapons, bows and arrows, spears, tomahawks and knives, were extensions of our hands, our spirit. However, at Colonel Riggs's insistence and thanks to the efforts of our tribal blacksmith, who had not left his forge for several days and nights, some of us, including me, carried specially forged knives of pure silver and spears with heavy silver heads, consecrated by gray feather. This was weaponry in which ancient magic combined with an understanding of our enemy's vulnerability. The air around our camps was electrified to the limit. Even nature, usually so noisy and alive in these mountains, fell silent in anxious anticipation of the coming storm. The soldiers made final checks of their gear, adjusted straps, loaded magazines. We, the Cherokee warriors, sat silently, many meditating, appealing to the spirits of our ancestors for strength, courage, and luck in the upcoming fight. The initial distrust and alienation that had existed between our two groups at the very beginning had completely disappeared, replaced by a sense of comradeship in arms and the awareness of a common deadly threat. Throughout this last night before the assault, an incessant howling emanated from the area of the cursed Black Fang mines. It was more furious, more defiant and threatening than ever before. The creatures knew of our hostile intentions and were preparing to meet us, challenging us. This howling was a true psychological attack, a test of our nerves. But it only strengthened our resolve. About an hour before dawn, when the pre-dawn darkness was particularly thick and cold, the units began their silent advance to their starting positions. The silence in the forest was absolute, broken only by the barely audible rustle of fallen leaves under our cautious feet and the quiet, muffled clink of the soldiers' metal gear. We were marching towards our destiny, plunging deeper into the very heart of darkness, where the ancient evil dwelled. Each of us knew the mortal danger of this night, but no one turned back. The first blow was struck by a group of warriors led by Gray Lynx, our experienced war chief. Acting with honed precision and cold-bloodedness, they, using loud guttural cries resembling our ancestors' war cries and brightly burning torches made of resin-soaked tow, managed to lure most of the Dogman pack out of the main, widest entrance to the mine. These creatures, enraged by the noise and light, rushed at the bait, unaware of the trap. They fell straight into our ingenious traps, preset in a narrow, rocky gorge leading to the mine. Deep wolf pits, carefully camouflaged with branches and grass, with sharp, needle-like wooden stakes embedded at the bottom, swallowed the first attackers. A terrifying shriek and roar of trapped creatures filled the air. Other dogmen fell into strong steel cable snares that instantly tightened around their legs and necks, breaking bones and cutting off breath. The remaining monsters, momentarily disoriented, were met with a hail of well-aimed fire from our best marksmen, who had taken up advantageous and well-concealed positions on the gorge slopes. Silver bullets and silver-tipped arrows found their targets, sowing death and panic among the dogmen. Under the cover of this fierce battle, which drew the main attention of the dogmen, Colonel Riggs's and Captain Iceman's main assault team, reinforced by me, Tolly, and 5 of our most experienced and fearless warriors, stormed into the main tunnel of the Black Fang mine. We moved quickly and cohesively, trying not to waste a second. Flashbang grenades thrown by Delta soldiers deep into the tunnel stunned and disoriented the first werewolf guards stationed at the entrance. For a few precious moments they froze, blinded and deafened, and then well-aimed bursts from Delta's automatic rifles, loaded with silver bullets, found their deadly targets. Several massive figures collapsed to the ground without a sound. The path into the lair was open. Inside the mine, impenetrable darkness reigned, barely pierced by the beams of our tactical flashlights, along with a disgusting, suffocating stench of decaying flesh, dampness, and something else, alien and sinister. The atmosphere was saturated with primal terror. The fight erupted in narrow, winding corridors and adits of the old mine, where Delta's tactical advantage in firepower and numbers was often negated by the confined space. Here, in the cramped darkness, instantaneous reaction, animalistic fury, and the ability to fight at extremely close quarters, practically hand-to-hand, became decisive factors. At one point, when a werewolf pinned a soldier against a wall, he activated his ultrasonic repeller at full power. The monster howled and recoiled for a moment, giving the soldier a chance to roll away and open fire. The effect was short-lived and didn't affect all creatures equally, especially in the heat of such a fierce battle, partly due to the shielding effect of the rock. But sometimes these devices bought precious seconds. The werewolf's razor-sharp claws easily tore through tough fabric, and even the thin steel of body armor, leaving deep, bleeding wounds on the soldiers' bodies. Their huge, slime-covered teeth snapped dangerously close to the fighters' faces. The sounds of gunshots, creature roars, cries of the wounded, and death rattles mixed into a monstrous cacophony of death. While Delta's main unit fought its way deeper into the mine complex towards the Alpha's suspected lair, our warriors, operating alongside them, performed their own, no less important task. We dispersed into the side tunnels using our knowledge of close-quarters combat tactics in confined spaces, and attacked werewolves trying to outflank the assault group or hit it from the rear. We tried to prevent them from regrouping, diverting some of their forces and not allowing them to concentrate all their fury on Riggs's unit. It was a dangerous game, but it allowed Delta to advance. We suffered losses, both us and the soldiers. A young Delta recruit, codenamed Rookie, just a boy despite his excellent training, was caught off guard by a werewolf leaping from the darkness and torn apart literally before Colonel Riggs's eyes, who couldn't help him in time. It was a terrible death. One of our oldest and most respected warriors, Crooked Oak, whose name was synonymous with courage and selflessness, sacrificed himself to save the others. When a group of several enraged dogmen who had broken through the surface cordon began pursuing us down a narrow tunnel, Crooked Oak, though gravely wounded, with a final effort of will, shot out the rickety wooden supports holding up the adit's roof. Tons of rock and earth crashed down, blocking the passage and cutting off the pursuers, but burying the hero himself beneath. I, Tally, and Colonel Riggs, somehow miraculously unscathed in this meat grinder, covering each other with fire and fending off creatures attacking from all sides, stubbornly fought our way towards the central part of the mine complex. It was there, according to drone data and our own senses, that the Alpha's lair, the main monster's den, was supposed to be. Major Evelyn Reed, armed with a standard-issue pistol, which she held with uncharacteristic determination, and her ever-present tablet, its screen flickering with schematics and data, followed us relentlessly. Despite the danger, she continued to record everything she could. occasionally shouting out information about the creature's weak spots she managed to identify during the fight, or warning of ambushes. Finally, after another fierce battle in a narrow passage, we burst into a huge underground chamber, a natural cave expanded and deepened by mining operations. A dim, deathly light emanated from phosphorescent fungi and lichens densely covering the walls and vault of the cave, blending with the trembling beams of our tactical flashlights and the flashes from the ongoing firefight nearby. In the very center of this vast hall, on a dais made of human and animal bones, stood he, the alpha werewolf. He was at least 8 feet tall, his massive muscular body covered in thick blue-black fur. His eyes burned with a frenzied, hellish fire, and a low, threatening growl escaped his enormous maw, full of dagger-sharp fangs. He was surrounded by 3 of the largest and most ferocious werewolf lieutenants, his personal guard. The alpha let out a deafening, furious roar that made the stone vaults of the cave tremble and sent small debris showering down, and without a moment's hesitation lunged straight at us. The final showdown had begun. The battle with the alpha werewolf and its bodyguards in the vast underground chamber was desperate and incredibly brutal. This monster possessed not only colossal physical strength but also astonishing speed and agility for its size. It easily tossed aside battle-hardened Delta soldiers as if they were rag dolls, not elite soldiers in full combat gear. Its claws, long and sharp as sickles, left deep furrows on metal and tore flesh. Colonel Riggs, fighting in the front ranks, received a severe, tearing wound to his leg and fell, unable to rise. The alpha, uttering a triumphant roar, raised its monstrous claws over the fallen colonel, preparing to deliver a fatal blow. At this critical moment I, Tally, gathering my last strength and all my hatred for this spawn of darkness, threw my spear at it. It was the same spear with a heavy silver head that our blacksmith had forged and Greyfeather had consecrated before the battle. The shaft, guided by a steady hand, whistled through the air and plunged deep into the monster's broad chest, just to the left of its heart. Simultaneously, Captain Iceman and the remaining Delta soldiers, still on their feet, taking advantage of the Alpha's momentary hesitation, emptied their magazines into it, aiming for its head and chest. The Alpha werewolf let out a final, heart-wrenching howl, full of pain, fury, and surprise, staggered, and with a deafening crash, collapsed onto the stone floor of the cave, splattering its dark, almost black blood everywhere. With its death, something intangible changed in the air. The surviving werewolves and dogmen, deprived of their leader and his mental control, suddenly panicked. Their fury turned to animalistic fear, and they began to retreat chaotically, trying to hide in the dark tunnels of the mine or escape to the surface. After the Alpha's death, the creature's organized resistance was definitively broken. Delta soldiers, despite fatigue and wounds, methodically and coolly began to clear the remaining tunnels and adits, eliminating individual werewolves and dogmen still attempting to resist. Our warriors, positioned on the surface and controlling the mine exits, finished off those who, in panic, tried to flee their underground lair. When the last shots died down and an ominous heavy silence fell upon the mines, broken only by the groans of the wounded, we began to count our losses. They were heavy. Rookie and 2 other Delta soldiers did not return from this subterranean hell, nor did 4 of our brave warriors, including Crooked Oak. There were many wounded, both on our side and among the soldiers. Every survivor of this carnage bore the marks of the brutal battle. Soon after the fighting ended, as the first rays of dawn began to penetrate the dense forest canopy, the thrum of approaching helicopters filled the sky. They landed on a hastily cleared site near the mine entrance. The evacuation of the wounded and the bodies of the fallen began. Along with medical teams, a special DCU team arrived, clad in fully sealed protective suits with self-contained breathing apparatus. These men, looking like aliens from another world, immediately began collecting trophies, tissue samples, blood, and even whole bodies of the slain creatures, which they carefully packed into special sealed containers for further study. Major Evelyn Reed, her face gaunt but still focused, personally supervised this entire process. Her eyes held not only fatigue but also a grim determination to uncover the truth, however terrible it might be. When the evacuation was complete and the DCU team had finished their work, Colonel Riggs, leaning on a makeshift crutch and clearly under the influence of a powerful painkiller the medics had given him, approached us, the representatives of the tribe. He informed us that, according to orders from above, the official story for the press and public would be managing the aftermath of a sudden collapse in an old, abandoned mine and dealing with an unusually aggressive pack of feral animals that posed a threat to the local population. All participants in the operation, both military and we, the tribal warriors, were required to sign strict non-disclosure agreements regarding state secrets. The truth about what had really happened in these Appalachian mountains, about the creatures we had fought, was to die with us, forever buried in these ancient hills. When the last helicopter, carrying away the bodies of the slain creatures and equipment, disappeared behind the treetops, Colonel Riggs, fighting through the pain in his wounded leg, approached me. His usually stern face was covered in soot and dried blood, his leg tightly bandaged. "Tali," he said, and his voice, usually cold and calculating, held unaccustomed notes. "You and your people, you are true warriors. I've seen a lot of fights, but what you showed here, without you, without your knowledge of these mountains and your courage, we would have all died here. I tell you this with all sincerity." In his eyes, which had always been steely and impenetrable, I saw for the first time genuine, unfeigned respect. I nodded silently in response. "You fought honorably too, Colonel," I replied. "You came to our land to help us, and you defended not only yourselves, but our land, our people." A silent understanding, forged in shared bloodshed, arose between us. After the soldiers departed, Grey Feather and other elders of our tribe conducted lengthy and complex purification rituals at the battle site near the entrances to the desecrated Black Fang mine. The thick smoke of sacred herbs, sage, cedar, and juniper, rose to the sky, carrying away the remnants of evil, defilement, and pain. Prayers, addressed to the Great Spirit and the spirits of the earth, were meant to calm the disturbed land, banish the last shadows of darkness, and guide the souls of the fallen warriors, both ours and the soldiers, to the land of eternal hunting.